Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. Today, our webinar is entitled IEP Process and Product, or IEP Part 1. The IEP team writes the IEP. Before we get started today, I would like to mention to you that our IEP Part 1 and Part 2 are under revision at this time. This is the IEP information that has been included for years for our people to help them as they move along through the IEP process. Revision will be available in approximately 2 months, and when it becomes available, we will provide an announcement so that you will be able to see our IEP new webinars. At this point in time, the Department of Public Instruction is in the process of changing their IEP team or IEP forms that will be available to all school districts and is available to all school districts at this time. Many of the districts are not using these new forms at this time, so that's why we are providing a very basic IEP Part 1 information to you today. The IEP process is about who the team members are and how we interact with each other and how we make decisions and how to reach an agreement about a child's educational program. The product is the document that the team actually writes to describe the children's program. The IEP stands for the Individualized Education Program. It is a document that must be in place for all students who receive special education services. Today we are going to talk about how the IEP document is developed and the IEP process itself. Let's begin with a description of what an individual education program is. As you can see on your screen, the IEP is a written program of services that is designed to meet the individual needs of your child. It is a legal commitment of resources and services, meaning if it is written in the IEP, the district is obligated to provide those resources and services. The IEP is also a plan of what the school will do to provide your child with an appropriate education. It is often referred to as a free appropriate public education, or FAPE. The IEP can be modified at any time by IEP team members at an IEP team meeting. The intent is that it can and should be modified if the needs of your child change. So as it says here, it is a tool to measure your child's progress, and it is changeable by the IEP team. Again, the IEP is not a daily lesson plan. It should not be teacher-centered, and it is not a predetermined program. And actually, it is a work in progress. At the IEP team meeting, the school district may provide a draft copy of the IEP team, or the IEP itself. This is intended to be a starting point for discussion and should be considered a work in progress. Everything that's written in the draft is subject to discussion and change. Again, it is not a legal commitment to reach the goals. It is the team's best effort to predict what goals your child will achieve if specific services outlined in the IEP are provided. What steps would be necessary for the IEP before it is written or as it is written for your child? The IEP process starts with a referral for a special education evaluation. Anyone can refer a child, including the child's parent. The referral needs to be in writing. It must state the reason why the person thinks that the child may have a disability and need special education. The person making the referral, if other than the parent, is required to inform the parent about making this referral. And when the school district receives a referral, they will notify the parent in writing and tell them who will be on the child's IEP team. Parents must sign consent to continue the initial evaluation process. Safeguards or procedural safeguards are to be sent to the parent. The school district cannot refuse to take a referral. Referrals can be made at any time, even when school is not in session. Response to intervention, and that's one of the services that schools provide if they find that children are having difficult times in schools, response to intervention cannot delay a formal evaluation. Procedural timelines will still apply. So let's look now at who is on the IEP team. And as our slide outlines for you, there are specific members that should be included in the IEP team. Parents are members of the IEP team. Parents receive written notice telling them what will happen next and inviting them to the IEP team meetings. Not less than one regular education teacher is a member of the team, and if the child is going to be continuing in the regular education classroom. Not less than one special education teacher who has specific training and or experience in the child's known or suspected area of special education needs is a member of this team. An LEA representative is the person who represents the local education agency, who usually means that this is the school district. This person is usually or should be qualified to provide or supervise special education, knows about general curriculum, and is knowledgeable about and authorized to commit the resources of the district. This person can be a principal, the director of special education, perhaps a school psychologist or program support specialist, and it might be the special education teacher, his or herself. The person who can interpret and the evaluation results must be a person on the special education IEP team. The parent can invite others to the meeting. The parent decides if this person has knowledge or special expertise about the child. The district can invite other district staff to the meeting who have knowledge or expertise as well about the child. The notice the district sends to the parent will tell who is actually coming to the IEP team meeting. A student must be invited to the meeting if the student will turn 14 during the time that the IEP will be in effect. This is because transition planning happens at age 14 in the state of Wisconsin. Normally, for national information, the transition process is required to start at age 16. So that's why in Wisconsin, we are so much ahead of the game by starting this process at age 14. If the parents or the child is over the age of 18, the school must invite a representative or any agency that will be providing or paying for transition services to the IEP team. So let's move on to our next slide. Members of the IEP team need to keep in mind that attendance is not necessary when an IEP team member's area is not going to be discussed. If this attendance, if the area of the IEP team members is going to be discussed or going to be modified, their attendance is required at the IEP team meeting. So if in fact this does happen, a parent must agree in writing that that person does not have to be at the IEP team meeting. A team member may be excused from attendance when the parent and the agency consent. Again, the parent's consent must be in writing. The member who is not going to be present must submit input in writing to the parents and to the team, if in fact information is required of that person. If a parent requests, the school must invite the birth to 3 coordinator or other representatives to the initial IEP meeting for a child who is transitioning from the birth to 3 program. And there's a couple of other things that I would like to add about the birth to 3 program at this point in time for individuals, especially if you have a child in that transition process. If the child has been in a birth to 3 program and is going to receive early childhood services from the school district, the school is required to inform the parents of their right to request that the district invite the birth to 3 program representatives to the IEP team meeting. As a side note, Wisconsin Facets offers additional workshops and trainings in the area of birth to 3, but we won't be discussing any more in specifics about the birth to 3 program today. And let's move on at this time. What does the IEP team actually do? And there are 3 basic activities that the IEP team is involved in. First, the first function of the IEP team is to evaluate the child. The purpose of the evaluation is to determine whether the child is eligible for special education and to determine what will be in the child's IEP. Eligible means, does the child meet the criteria for the disability the child is suspected of having, and as a result of that disability, does the child need special education services? We will talk more in depth about the evaluation process and reevaluations in another training. The second activity, as listed on your slide, is to develop, review, and revise the IEP document itself. And the third function of the IEP team is to determine special education placement. This happens at least once a year. In front of you now on this slide is the initial evaluation and timeline process. Most of this information is known to all. Parents should become a little bit acquainted with this just in case there are procedural hiccups as the process goes along, and you can follow along for this initial timeline with this slide in the future. So as you can see, the referral is received, and as it is received, the school district has up to 15 business days to be able to respond to either the parent request, if there is a request by the parent, or whomever provides that information. So again, the picture shows the timeline that the IEP team must follow if a child is referred for special education. And please look at the bottom of the page and the bottom of the initial evaluation timeline, in the fact that within 30 calendar days of in this timeline, this is something to specifically keep in mind because the development and the determination for placement must happen within those 30 calendar days. If a child is found to be eligible as a child with a disability within 30 days of the finding, the IEP team must hold a meeting to develop an IEP and to determine the child's placement. Now we're going to talk about some of that information that's actually included in the IEP and what's determined in talking about the IEP document itself. The IEP team writes a present level of academic achievement and functional performance. This tells how the child is doing in school right now. The team uses a variety of information from various sources when carrying this process out. One of the things that they must look at is current test results, and also were there assessments done previously, or what assessments would be new, and how is the child doing in their current classes or in this particular subject area. There will be a discussion of the child's strengths and the child's needs. Parents will share their concerns about their child. These concerns can be about his or her current classroom work and or progress, and any concerns that the parents have for the child's future. Parent concerns can also be about other parts of the school day, for example, school-sponsored activities, in the community itself, or at home. So when we're writing about the child's present level of achievement and functional performance, parents want to be real knowledgeable about what they put into that information and want to provide as much information as they possibly can about their child's present level of academic achievement. And again, as the second point listed here, for preschool children, we want to know how the disability affects their participation in their appropriate age-related activities. Continuing on with the discussion of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, it must be a clear, descriptive statement that includes the list of the following things that are on your slide. First of all, these must be measurable. Measurable means being able to see it, hear it, touch it, and count on it. It tells how the child is doing right now, and this is what we consider to be called the baseline data, just exactly what the child is doing at this particular time. It should include both strengths and the child's needs, and use language that is readily understood by all, meaning there should be no educational jargon or jargonese. The information should be current, and it should be what and how the child is doing now. It can be written for academic and non-academic areas, meaning for classes, extracurricular activities, for a job site, social skills, and playground activities, etc. When we're talking about functional, we mean that it should be about how the child uses his knowledge and skills in daily routines and requirements. So here's an example on your screen, and I'm not going to pursue it, so you can go back and take a look at it as an example of some of the present level of academic information that is presented to you. There's a lot of words on this particular slide, and while reading this slide, there are certain parts of the statement that I would like to bring to your attention. First of all, as we said before, the present level must be measurable, and it tells us that Dan is in the 4th grade. This present level tells us also what is being used to help Dan learn, such as things like his assignment notebooks, reading for tests to him, and when a peer tutor is used. The baseline is that Dan actually reads at a 2nd grade level at 110 words per minute with about 8 to 10 errors. The statement tells us that one of Dan's needs is that he cannot complete grade level reading activities independently, and that this affects Dan's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. It also tells us that Dan's parents are concerned about this reading, and Dan's strength is his math area. The statement also tells us that other strengths, such as the sense of humor and his ability to make friends, are important strengths to consider. Our next slide talks about measurable annual goals, and they are to include both academic and cultural goals. Annual goals are the next part of the IEP. Annual goals should answer the question, what should the child be doing in the next year? Each goal should be directly related to a child's identified in the present level that has been written. It should be about improving the child's involvement and progress in learning what other children his age are actually learning at this time. Other educational needs that result from the child's disability can and should be discussed at this time. The child can be involved and make progress in the general education curriculum, and that should be noted as far as where he is going and what his goals should be. What do annual goals actually include? And again, just as a reminder, the annual goal should be measurable. It should be something we see, we hear, we can touch, or we can count. It should have 3 parts to the educational process, and these are the 3 parts that are now showing on your screen. The consistency of an annual goal should include context, such as when reading aloud or during recess, so that context when it's happening, which is the place or the condition when we expect to see the goal happen. Functional behavior, which is what the child will do that is useful and realistic. And then criteria, which is how the child, or how we know the child is reaching the goal or making progress to the goal itself. So as it says on your screen, the context, as we talked about, is listed there. The functional behavior, so what the child will do, and the criteria, how will we know if the goal is actually reached? So at the very bottom of that slide, there's sort of like a tip or reminder. The child will do what, where or when, and to what level or degree. So if you keep that little tip in mind as you're looking at the annual goals for an IEP, you will always remember the 3 parts to the IEP itself as far as being measurable goals, the 3 parts to the IEP measurable goal area. The child will do what, where or when, to what level or to what degree. So here are some examples again of annual goals, and we won't go specifically through those, but you can go back and look at them again. There's an example here of an annual goal written for Dan, of one that was written for Erin, and one that was written for Ed. A good resource for other examples is a publication entitled The Guide to Writing IEPs. And we will provide additional information and resources to you at the end of our webinar today, as well as our continuation of this webinar that'll take place on Thursday. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about benchmarks or short-term goals and short-term goals themselves. For benchmarks are major milestones to a goal that specify time segments. For example, the child will do what, to what level or degree, and by when. A short-term objective is measurable. It's an intermediate step to the goal. The child, again, will do what, to what level or degree, and under what circumstances. These steps or milestones are required only when a child will be taking various assessments that have been discussed in the past, and that is basically a whole new webinar, and we will discuss some of those things also in a later presentation. Our next discussion and slide talks about measuring and reporting progress. So the next part of the IEP is about progress. The IEP must tell how the child will progress toward the IEP annual goals and how it will be measured. It must also tell when periodic reports will be given to parents on the progress of that child and how that child is making progress. Progress reports help parents and the school know if they are doing the right things to help the child to learn. And on your slide, there are some specifics listed to you. So how will you actually know if the child is doing what we want them to do? We will use such things as work samples, classroom tests, records of observation, or other measurable ways to compare with that baseline that we talked about before and what the actual projected goal is for the child. Periodic reports will be given to the parents and may be at conferences, at quarterly reports, or at other times when necessary. Our next slide discusses services. Services that will be described in three parts. The first part is the present level. We have discussed and described three parts of the IEP before. Present level, annual goals, and how we progress will be measured from where the child starts out to where the child should be at the end of the year. The fourth part of this IEP is services. Services are the things that the school will do for the child to help him or her reach the goals and be involved in the school activities with other children his or her age. Services will always include special education. So on your slide, there are some specific things that are listed for you. These are services that will help the child advance toward their annual goals, progress in what would be considered to be the general education curriculum, will help the child participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, and be educated and participate with all children. So inclusion is a very important part of the service area. So what else is in the child's IEP and what should be considered? Oops, let's go back here for a minute. We went a little ahead of ourselves. What else is in the IEP? In the next training of the IEP, we'll talk about several different things. We'll talk about types of services that the IEP team will write into the IEP. We'll talk about the extent that the child will not be in regular education classes and or activities that the child will do with those children who are the non-disabled peers, and how the child will take tests that our other children will be taking to measure their progress in the state or in the district. So on our slide, we talk about three different things again: the types and the amounts of services that the child will be participating in, the time away from the regular education classroom, and the state and district assessments. So as we move along and as we discuss our next step in the process of what our IEP Part 2 is, there are some additional information that will be discussed in our follow-up IEP Part 2. And some suggestions for parents as they are getting ready for their child's IEP would be that they should attend as many trainings as they possibly can in the area of special education to become as knowledgeable about the subject as they possibly can. One of the great areas that we have, that we're lucky to have, is the internet. And so you can easily do an internet search on IEPs, and you'll find pages and pages of information on different IEPs and on what should be included in IEPs. Also, we have various service agencies that provide information, both written in the form of webinars, in the form of recordings to you, in the form of handouts and trainings. There are several of them listed on the slide that's included here. The Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative is an initiative that provides additional services and information to parents. Our local cooperative education service agencies provide additional information and training to parents and to professionals as well. The Department of Public Instruction has a multitude of information under their special education tab on their website. And of course, our own agency, Wisconsin Facets, has additional information that's available to you. Another thing that we urge parents to do is to ask questions when you need more information. Ask questions about the process itself from your child's teacher. Ask questions from those that are in your child's school. Set up meetings with individuals within the schools to try and see if you can receive more information, and just to be a good collector of information. Talk with your child's teacher as often as you possibly can, because that information will be provided to you. And then establishing a relationship with your child's teacher is of utmost importance, because that's the person who has ultimately as much information about your child during the time that your child spends away from you and at school. We will be discussing the special education process in our next special education discussion of the IEP Part 2. But I'll just show you some of this information that will be discussed in IEP Part 2, just so that you'll see some of the upcoming information and the definition itself of what special education actually is. Special education is specially designed instruction, and it's needed to provide and to attend to the unique needs of your child. Every IEP must include special education. Special education may include all those things listed below: speech therapy, specially designed physical education, assistive technology, traveling training, vocational instruction, vocational education, and instruction in various subject areas. So at this time, I'm going to check back and see if there are any specific questions that people might have. And at this time, I don't see any other questions. At this time, the IEP Part 1 has been completed, and that we hope that in our discussion of specially designed services, we will have a concluding discussion in our next IEP follow-up on related services as well. So thank you all for participating today. We'd like to encourage you to please fill out the evaluation that will be sent to you immediately following the workshop today. Thank you again for your participation, and have a good day.